musicians, sometimes these countdowns end up in odd time signatures. Let's just say that. Welcome back to Basecamp Beta. I'm Chris.
This is Sean.
And this week we are very excited to have Matthias Puech from GRM, from the Groupe de Recherches Musicales. He is a research scientist there and the lead developer of GRM Atelier, which has been released for a few months now. So Matthias, welcome.
Thank you guys for the invitation.
First, we just wanted to get an idea of your background, kind of as when you were young, how you got into music, how you got into the weirder edges of music, how you got into maybe electronics and technology, and all of that.
Yeah, sure. It's always a bit hard to point this out to a specific moment, right? But it was always an interest. I guess my parents were music lovers, mostly classical music, but they had a few records, from the 70s, the American minimalist and stuff that woke my curiosity, let's say.
So that would be like Philip Glass and
Yeah,
Steve
exactly.
Wright,
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, there was a Phil Glass record I remember very clearly. I still have it actually, which I listened for hours and hours. Not quite
which
understanding. Oh, that's a good question. Wait.
Was it Glassworks maybe?
No. It was a bit of an odd one. I can't figure it out now.
Let us know if you get it, and we can provide a link for people.
All right. Yeah. So this there was a couple. So the first real musical moment I remember was pop music. Of course, it was just because it was so new in my family. It wasn't so much of pop music. So when I discovered it by myself, it was a real enlightenment. And so fast forward a couple of years, but I don't quite remember how, but I got interested in how music was made. First, from a very technical point of view, I was always more drawn to the technical side of things than the more artistic. It was not the center of my focus or the center of my attention at the time. It was more, how do you do it? How it's made, technically. I got a bit of music education. I got into piano at a young age just because, it was as a Parisian son of intellectual parents, it was something you were doing, right? But I didn't get very far. I was mostly very frustrated by it, by the sportive or like athlete kind of mentality behind it, And it was not what I was hearing, That was not the sonatas, the Chopin's sonatas that I was working hours and hours. It was not that Philip Glass record I was hearing. It was not the same.
Right.
So I was just wondering, how do you make this? How do you make, Michael Jackson's Dangerous or stuff like that? So I got into. So it was that was all pre-internet, of course. So I got into like recording techniques, finding old microphones from yard sales, trying to hook up a sound card, a sound blaster to my computer, like having the money to buy a sound blaster, and trying to understand how it was made. So I was drawn by the technical side of music and very much drawn to computers and programming at a very young age. I got a computer. I was quite lucky. I got a computer. My first computer. I was 7 years old, and there wasn't much you could do with it except for programming in Microsoft Basic. So I got into this, making video games and making all sorts of stuff. So yes, these were my two interests at a younger age. The musical side of things, I would say, or the artistic interest came mostly from novelty and not understanding what I was hearing, right? Listening to pop songs on the radio or reading, I got tired of it quickly just because I knew I kind of intuited that there was some kind of other world out there,
And so what was the way in which you found these other types of music? Was that at that time, was that going to the record stores? I mean, probably internet wasn't, but maybe there would have been.
Yeah, a couple of years later, there was this very lively scene in Paris. So when I was a teenager, this very lively electronic music scene in Paris. Club culture mostly centered around house music, the French touch, techno, especially techno, and the first rave parties, the original free parties, coming down from the UK, Spiral Tribes and all these people.
I was going to say, so you were going to like the Technoval, the Spiral Tribe raves as a teenager, or
actually not. But I was reading about it. So there was this magazine called Nova magazine. At that time, it was a radio station. And there was all this ecosystem around basically the underground scene. So Nova was one of it. There was this gay radio station called Radio FG, emitting from the center of Paris. You could go to the studios, hang out with the people, and it was centered around gay culture, but it was very much more centered around the music culture, the house music culture, the techno music culture. And there was this show late at night on Sunday nights. It was called Audio, I think, talking about more oddball music, It was the first time I heard Ryoshi Ikeda. It was the first time I heard the whole IDM scene at that time, Aphex Twin, etc. There were a couple of magazines too specialized in techno music. So it really came from this club culture that was pervasive all over Paris in these years. And I was much too young to answer your question. I was much too young to go to clubs. I was like 13 or 12 or 13 at that time. I was much too young to go to the clubs, to go to rave parties, of course. But I felt like kind of an observer in that scene.
It was calling to you.
It was calling to me, yes. And so when I got to the age where I could go to the parties and attend the clubs and etc., actually my attention had completely shifted to the other side, so to the more experimental things that you would listen at home and not in the club.
So did you so following this kind of a musical trajectory, where did your studies take you?
So I study, so right around that time I started going to the university. I got into physics first. My goal from very young, from high school years, was to enter the IRCAM courses. So IRCAM in Paris had this master's program. It was not called a master's at the time, but DEA. That was very famous for training not sound engineers, not musicians, but centered around technology relating to music and research. And a couple of years before that, when I was around 12 or 13, my parents were very worried that I was so drawn to this club culture and stuff, and they told me they brought me to IRCAM almost by accident. One Saturday afternoon, we passed by, we entered the building, and they were asking if IRCAM had anything to offer to a young high school student, and they didn't.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, they didn't, but they had some training programs for composers to use the tools they were developing. Audio Sculpt, Max MSP at that time, etc., etc. So I actually enrolled there. I was 12, 13. I enrolled into I was the youngest next to working composers, 40, 50 years old. And I didn't understand everything they were explaining. I couldn't use any of the knowledge I was getting because basically I didn't have a Macintosh and everything was Mac centered, still is. But this opened my eyes completely, and it opened my eyes to this world of technology that was not used only for technology, but for actual researching something a bit grander, not technology for technology's sake. So this
your
was
parents, in steering you away from the dangerous drugs of nightlife, steered you to a much more dangerous drug of
Well, I was going to say that that's very nice
high experimental music.
Because
Exactly.
I feel like American parents would see experimental music as a potentially less desirable career path than
Right.
club music and.
I don't know. Maybe that changed. Maybe they had no idea. They it was not their specialty. It was not
Right.
their world. So their world was the conservatory and classical education. So I got into university, studied physics to enter the IRCAM program that I knew of because of this, and then very quickly I left physics. Physics was really too hard for me. I think physics is a
I was also a physics student in university, and I saw it out, but I was also like, as someone who was super interested in music, which kind of is what brought me to physics. I was there with a lot of people who were really interested in questions that I found too difficult and that I didn't care enough about. And so I was like,
exactly,
okay,
exactly. So I switched to computer science after that. And one teacher of mine in computer science had a very good analogy, I think, and I really believe it's true. Physics is, of all the sciences, physics is really the grown-up science. You have to be really careful with physics, just because you're making approximations all the time. You're modeling the real world in a way that is very easily your model can be wrong.
right.
Whereas computer science is just a bunch of you hit the world very hard with a hammer and nothing bad happens. You have a bug and that's it.
Yeah.
The computer is kind of the safe place and physics is the real world.
But these things are so increasingly imbricated, right? Like a failure in someone's computer modeling can have like disastrous.
Well, just look at
results
Boeing,
now.
right? I mean,
Of course. I mean, of course, this is not.
Yeah,
This is not true. Not true anymore, and it was not very true at that time. But talking from a research, not from an industry point of view, but really from the research point of view, maths and in a way computer science too, as kind of a branch of math or the contrary, is much more forgiving than physics. Physics, you're really hitting the world hard. With you have to be careful with your models. If you do research in computer science, you have a judge of law, which is the formalism you're using. The theory, the logics that you're using. This is the judge. Anyway,
Right,
I'm getting sidetracked a little bit, but so
that's good.
I got into computer science this way just because it was easier for me. I was already kind of a young hacker and was loving it. So this was it was much easier for me. So I blended in much easier.
And what was your first experiences or exposure to things like musique concrète or work of some of the GRM composers and people like that? Would you have been exposed to that during your young time at IRCAM, or would that have come a bit later during university?
So it's not very clear to me. I know that I asked specifically on my 14th birthday the Traité des objets musicaux, des objets sonores, as a present for my birthday.
Wow.
But I don't remember exactly where I got this idea. It might have been education, parents or whatever. It might have been IRCAM. It might even have been this radio program I was telling you about. The journalists who were there are still around. They came from this culture and they knew this culture very well. So, and at that time also a lot of the musicians, the active musicians, the IDM musicians, the techno musicians, they were kind of referring back to this era of the first musique concrète, but also the pioneers everywhere in Germany, in the US, and stuff.
Well, the first time I think I came across your work was with your Parasites firmware for the Mutable Instruments clouds. I think I was actually living in Paris at the time. I remember going to buy clouds and putting your firmware on because I had seen.
No way.
I think I found your page and you had some videos about parasites, and I was intrigued by clouds, and I put your firmware on and really enjoyed it. This is when I was doing research at ENS. What made you interested in developing your own firmware for clouds? I mean, you've talked about your interest in learning about the techniques of making music. But had you done things like circuit bending or instrument hacking before? If you had been at Earcom and using Macs, then they're kind of, you start to get a bit of a gray line between what's making something in Macs and what's circuit bending. But I guess what made you interested in making that Parasites firmware?
I was a researcher at that time. I was living in Montreal, and I was a researcher, a postdoc at the university there, and not related to music at all. It was just computer science. I ended up basing most of my career on, and I was kind of fed up with research at that time. It was really too dry, too theoretical. I didn't see it. It was so difficult to have an impact on the world with that. And I had gotten the bug, the modular bug on MudWiggler a few years before that. Started buying modules at Modular Square for the right. First ones in Paris. Going back and forth between Montreal and Paris, buying modules.
What were your first modules?
Maths. Peaks,
right?
Peaks from Multiple Instruments, and I'm looking at my rack here just for. There was a third one I can't remember. Maybe Tides. There was a third one. I still have it. I don't remember. And so Clouds came out a few months into my discovery, my discovery of modular synth. And somebody had told me already that Mutable Instruments was a Parisian brand, that they were open sourcing all their software. And as you say, I was not familiar with coding, developing musical instruments at all. But the line was already kind of blurred from the start with my Max MSP training, and that was actually all I was interested in. A lot of people, they get into modular to make actually music. I was just interested, just at the beginning, I was just interested in how it's made, how to process sound in analog digital form, how sound is formed, and what happens if you make these two things interact together. It was really more of a curiosity research than to make music or to get something out.
Yeah, so I guess this leads into sort of a follow-up question that I had there. I was curious about how you conceived of your sort of dual roles as both composer and designer, and it sounds to me like your compositional practice emerged from kind of a purely kind of technical perspective.
At first, yes. This is why I bought the modular synth. This is why I mean, of course, it was to make music, but to make music just to have fun, not to make a career out of it, not to be a musician. I was not dreaming of that. It was never a goal in itself.
Can you talk a little more, just like where do you see, like expand more on that? Where do you see? How do you situate yourself as both kind of instrument designer and composer, and where do you see the lines between these things?
Okay.
Or do they operate kind of discreetly, or is this sort of more of a continuum?
Yeah. So I got into modular because it was for the hobby, for the hobby of it, Wanted to understand what was going on, but at the same time, I was making music without even knowing it, I was recording patches, layering things on top of each other in Ableton, and awaken my aesthetic sense. That way, I was always a music listener and a music lover, but I was making the first experiments, but really experiments of, here is a sound, here is like a 5 minutes patch that I recorded just because I liked it and because I was happy that I could make it. Here is another song, here is another one, and now it was almost a miracle that I could layer one on top of the other, or put one on the side of the other, or make a little bit of a cut from this, for a little bit of editing, and this now was sounding like music to me. It was the music I had in my head. So this was the first realization. The second realization after that was, this is so frustrating. I know a bit of engineering. I know how these things are are made because I know programming, why this did the designer of this module or this instrument didn't make my pot go little bit just I need just 10% more of the run of the pot, okay, I'm gonna edit the source code. I know it's gonna take me half a day to figure out how to plug this thing, buy the adapters, etc., and I'll be done. So it all started like that, really out of a bit the frustration of not being able to achieve what I thought was very much possible with the hardware I had, So the editing source code was kind of the gateway. And then I began to read source code from Mutable Instruments and many others. Then reading books, getting books from the Montreal library, the public library about DSP, trying to understand how it was. It felt very weird with the scientific computer science background. It felt a bit. DSP was a weird science, a weird audio DSP. Felt like almost a recipe book to me. There was no theory, there was no higher organization of the knowledge. It's you want to make a reverb, here is how people have done it so far, but there is no real theory behind it or whatever, except for the physics.
Do you have any examples of that? Because that makes me think of the DAFX book, which is kind of, to me, like that book is kind of like really just a recipe book of like.
This is exactly. That's where I started. I borrowed the DAFX book at the library. Realized this. It was a good introduction because it allows you to really experience things. Try things out in Max MSP or directly on the hardware. But it was like, how do these magic number appear all the time? Like, why do I have to make a flanger 40 milliseconds wide, and not wider, And then I found the second book I read was Miller Pocket's book, which was a lot more grounded into like the theory of DSP or control theory which is the basis of all engineering, basically.
Were you surprised? I mean, your Parasites firmware went on to be quite popular. I will say, as someone who worked at Control, and we got in hundreds of used cloud modules for us to sell. I would say like a large percentage of them had the Parasites firmware on it, and it was quite as far as third-party firmwares, it was a very successful thing. Did that sort of encourage you to keep pursuing this? How was it a surprise to you?
So first, there was so much enthusiasm at that time, right? In the community, from myself personally, but also from the community, everything was blooming, right? You remember that period. Parasites was an accident. I'm not sure if it's quite really a happy accident, in the sense that I got really carried away with it. I put so many hours into it, so much effort, and it's really all over the place, there is no real consistency. Of course, the hardware is not it's not dedicated hardware, so it was very hard to learn, etc. But I got carried away, making new modes, making new effects, using it in my own music, and putting it online for free. I was really surprised that overnight, I was in Montreal, so I was publishing an update, going to sleep, and in the next morning, waking up with a page of comments on Mudwiggler about people who already downloaded, used it, etc. Yeah, it was a surprise, but I had actually no idea what I was doing. It was blissful naivety.
How did you then went from that to collaborating with ForMS on a handful of dedicated Eurorack modules, the typographic delay and the ensemble oscillator. One thing that I find really interesting just through this conversation is it sounds like your compositional voice, your voice as a musician, came through your interest in technology. And I find that really interesting because these modules that then you go on to work on are, very kind of singular ideas, ideas for a specific instrument. So were you, you get into technology, you start discovering that with that technology, you can find your voice as a musician. And then I guess walk me through that from that stage to then saying, oh, I have ideas for these new modules, and how you then conceive of an instrument in its own right.
I believe the answer to your question lies into the GRM ethos, or the GRM founding ideas of Pierre Schaeffer about the most important thing is to be a good listener, not a good musician. We're especially with the tools of the studios of the studio that are available now, we are first and foremost listeners of the experience of the interaction we have with our material. Material being like a new machine that you just bought, or a recorded sound that you're editing, etc. I think my music culture was maybe the most important asset of this, much more than a practice or something like that. So what gave me the ideas of the modules, of the functions, etc., it was primarily not technology, more a scientific curiosity, what happens if, and I probably had hundreds of these what if moments, but the kind of magic happens in the selection of it, in the listening of these ideas. You make 1,000 experiments, one idea will emerge out of it that will be out of the norm, and you recognize it if you aware, or you keep your ears open on the musical phenomenon. Okay, musical phenomenon is maybe the best way I said it. Something happens in the interaction with your machines. You might use them just to have fun as a hobby, or to discover new things, etc. But something happens at the moment where you're stopping and kind of looking at the grander picture of it, rediscovering something that you'd made as something that actually emerged, and not as a fabrication.
So how are you doing these experiments then? I mean, if you're kind of making a lot of experiments and seeing what happens, how are you making these experiments, and what then, I guess, tell us a little bit about that feeling of finding something that you think could then be a viable product that ostensibly someone would buy.
I'm going to give you the example of the ensemble oscillator. The second one I did with 4MS, I think it illustrates better. So I got into serial music, and especially spectralism. I was really interested in. I didn't know much theoretically about it, like from a musicology point of view before. I had been exposed to it briefly, but didn't quite understand it. And you know how it is. All of a sudden, I was 30 something, and all of a sudden I was enjoying it. It was kind of the next thing that was accessible to me. I had tried to listen to it half a dozen times in my life. But this time, something grabbed on, because the culture, my personal culture, was bringing me there. So that was on one side, and on the other side, on the scientific side, let's say, I was discovering, reading all these books. I was discovering, the theory of the Fourier theory of the harmonic spectrum, and really page 0 of the book.
I have very nerdy photos of me at Fourier's tomb in Père Lachaise. The nerdiest thing I have, but photos of me looking very happy next to Fourier's. Very nice. It's a beautiful tomb in Père Lachaise. It's for the nerds.
You're giving me an idea here. I haven't been.
You gotta go. Yeah. It's like Jim Morrison's tomb, but you're gonna find weirdos like me.
with spectres.
Oh yeah,
Spectres, yes.
there's some
I was
real
trying
harmonic
out,
shit
trying
going
out
on there.
trying out a joke in English. I wasn't sure it would land well.
Very
This is an interesting idea. I haven't been to the tomb anyway. So I was discovering this theory, and it got me thinking about this gray area that spectralism is kind of exploring at the same time as the books about Fourier theory. I was reading this kind of gray area between how the brain interprets some particular periodic sound as a timbre or an ensemble, a set of things that are layered on top of each other. And so it got me thinking, what's this gray area and how does it sound like? I want to hear it, something that tricks a bit my brain. So I want to explore this illusion. So I started working directly on hardware, on clouds actually, because it was my platform I was familiar with, directly in C++, experimenting with these ideas of building up large spectra of things. And so it's a bit my interest where it got into the two directions, The ensemble oscillator was kind of the meeting point between my musical discovery of something new, some new genres or theory, musicology theory, and some scientific interest.
So just to sort of sketch this out, it sounds to me like your design practice is rooted both simultaneously in kind of a social conditions as well as kind of observation of like acoustic phenomena, which then result in an instrument design, which then is sort of and the sort of aesthetic product is sort of downwind of that.
I'm not sure what you call social in this case. You mean cultural?
Oh, yes, like exactly.
Okay. Yes, yeah. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. These two things meet. There isn't an artistic brain and a curious brain.
Right.
There's a whole spectrum of it, and they meet somewhere in the middle. And this is exactly the place that interests me.
So, what was then your path towards joining GRM as a research and development scientist? Because that seems to be the next big shift for you.
Yeah, it was a bit of luck, a bit of an accident too. I was at that time, so 2019, I was a researcher at the university and a teacher. I was what we call here maître de conférence, associate professor.
This is back in Paris, not in Montreal.
Yeah, in Paris. Yeah, I was back in Paris, got this university position, and I was a bit. There was a lot of teaching. There was a lot of teaching to do, not a strong emphasis on research. And anyway, the research I had been basing my career on, which was programming languages and logics, so formal logics and programming languages, it got really too dry for me to do. I was not very successful at it. So, and from the Parasites time and from the Modular Synths time, my musical or design career was kind of picking up. So I decided to take a leave from the university in 2020 to pursue both designing instruments and like being a musician, touring, making art installations. I had a big project for a large art installation based on embedded devices and that I would program myself just to discover new things. And so I took a leave, took 6 months of being a freelancer, out in the world for the first time. And actually, right at that time, I got a commission from GRM. So GRM is mostly, you could say, so the majority of GRM's activity is production, concerts, residencies, right, etc. So I got there first as a musician. They went to a show of mine and spotted something of interest, and they programmed me into one of the festivals there, Festival Présence. And from there on, so I went to do a residency at GRM, And from there on, we talked a little bit. They got to they knew a little bit about my designing background and my computer science background. And it turned out that the person who had been doing GRM tools for 30 years was retiring that year. And so they proposed the position basically.
And so how does that go from you joining, because you didn't join to then just be a custodian of GRM tools, you came to create, or was it when they asked you to join, was it kind of explicitly to create a new tool, a new product, or
No, basically the plan was to make evolutions on the existing GRM tools. And nothing related to creating, nothing related to composing music in the position itself, because this is not what GRM is for, but it was mostly as evolution of the tools. And, GRM tools had such a special place in my heart. From the super young age, I discovered it back in the days in the 90s. I just couldn't say no. It's an opportunity to take on a project like that that's so meaningful personally. It was impossible to say no. It was an engineering position. It was not a real research position per se, but it was difficult too. And so I got into GRM in 2020. Started to work on with the designer who was about to retire. Discovered that the project was extremely important to so many people, and also was showing sign of its age in the sense that software engineering has this weird thing where software source code kind of rots. The world evolves around it. And it stays. Yeah. If it stays like that, it just dies because it has to be maintained. It has to be. And so the source code of GRM tools was super impressive because with very limited means, very limited resources, but both in terms of the machines that were available at the time and also in terms of the support it was or the support it was getting from the institution, it managed to do a lot to go a long way, with no real communication behind it, but it was really showing the signs of its age, and it was such a big burden of maintenance that I first told my director, "Hey, it's not for me. It's just too big of a task, and it's not gonna be at this rate. I'm not going to do proper creative audio work for years.
Right.
There's years of menial work to do before that. And something unexpected happened. And he told me, "Okay, then do whatever you want."
Well, so how did you approach it? Because Atelier is kind of remarkable in how well it synthesizes the historical GRM tools into a very fluid and much more, contemporary interface, both using it as a plugin version or as a standalone version. It's a very fluid piece of software to use. It's also very au courant with modular synthesizers, it really builds off the sort of the current understanding amongst a lot of musicians of modulation and how synthesizers work. So I guess, talk to me a little bit about how you approach this whole process of fusing the GRM tools, these kind of long-standing premier digital tools, with this kind of more contemporary approach.
First of all, thanks. Second, same way as before. So I took on to reinvent, rewrite something historical that I knew very well in a way that, first of all, I was not looking for a sleek, modern anything or a new, up-to-date 2025 features. I was just looking for what do I really need? What is my frustration in using the historic GRM tools? And how can I solve how can I resolve that? You know, what can I add to what's existing so that I can personally make music with it? You know, and completely make music with it. This was this was the only guideline was I really miss this particular not feature but you know aspect or side to it, and I was coming from Eurorack, you know, so I knew already deep down, you know, that what you all also know, that the magic is in the is not especially in the processors or what each individual module does, but really their interaction and what you can build out of not the atomic building blocks of DSP, audio DSP, let's say, like in Max MSP, but something a little bit higher level that gives you, that's already not, I don't like saying high level, but let's say something that's a bit richer, like a cake, you know, a bit sweeter, that you can, not the basic ingredients, but already kind of a small cake that you can build your dish from, you know.
Yeah. Higher level in the like programming sense, where it's not where it's, you know, things are already in place for you to make what you need to do.
It's a higher level ecosystem than Max MSP, for instance. Where
Yes.
you have to build everything
But higher level has kind of first it has a kind of a you know, connotation that I don't like, and also it's a misleading term to me, because some basic building blocks, some Max MSP objects will be much more involved or complicated inside than a simple comb filter like I did in Atelier, you know, or a simple like a delay line, you know, which is the building block. What I prefer is the analogy. Sorry, I'm talking a lot about youth and my youth especially. But as a kid, I was offered once by a babysitter a very simple present, a rope, just a rope. She was working in circus, I think. She was an actor at circus, and she came home one day with a rope. And, you know, I was living in a like 60, 70 square meter apartment in the middle of Paris. This is not the typical thing you would offer a kid. But actually it was brilliant, because a rope can be so many things, you know? And we played, my sister and I, for hours and hours with this rope, just because it didn't have a cultural flavor, connotation to it, you know? It was just the bare thing. It's already quite involved, you know. It's not fabric. It's not. It has knots on both sides. It has knots on both sides for you already, but it's something that's agnostic in a way in the use you can have. This is
so you encounter the rope, as you said, stripped of cultural baggage, as one like ideally would encounter the sound object, right?
Yeah, like a sound object that you approach without culture, but and also to me, like GRM Tools was. GRM Tools was kind of the rope of DSP at that time. You know, it was not the building block. It was not some emulation of something that was there before in the analog world. It was not something. It was not definitely not a one-click solution or a one-knob solution for all your problems. There was no problem. It was. It was not solving a problem. It was creating actually more problems for you. You know, it was creating some more experiences in a way. You know, something new. So I was keen on keeping this aspect into Atelier of what we are offering. It's not rocket science. It's not some advanced thing. It's a comb filter. It's a pitch shifter of the simplest kind in terms of DSP. The pitch module inside of Atelier. It's literally just a delay line with some overlap add playback into it. It's really the first kind of pitch shifter you can think of, you know. But because it's arranged and presented to you in that way, where I mean, I don't know, if you modify the window size. First, you can modify the window size. It's not fixed for like voices or instruments or whatever. You can modify it freely from extremely short, unusably short to unusably large. Then you can use it for many different things, you know. It's not a pitch shifter. It's just a delay line with overlap add and some.
Yeah, I think there is something about the Atelier design principles that reminds me a fair amount of Amelie's approach with music with mutable instruments.
Yeah, but I'm not surprised.
One thing I wanted to ask about is spatial sound, because that's, of course, like a huge part of the GRM lineage, like from Xenakis's Concrète PH piece for like, I don't know, 60 loudspeakers in the Philips Pavilion, or all of the acousmatic work that Francois Bail mostly pioneered. You know, this is a huge part of GRM. And, you know, you're coming to GRM from Eurorack, where, you know, you're lucky if you get stereo. You know, it's your world is in mono in Eurorack because, well, it's just not practical to do very big multi-channel things. I guess tell me a little bit about this shift you had to undergo as a musician, as a designer, when you're moving from this analog mono world to this multi-channel digital world. And you know, because the multi-channel functionality in Atelier is very elegantly done. Yeah, just I guess tell me a little bit about that.
GRM is mono. It's the same thing. Let me explain. So I first approached GRM's philosophy, or the philosophy about spatial sound that was pioneered there. You know, I first approached it as a musician. I got this. I made this piece there, and it was meant to be played on the Acousmonium. Or on a subset of it for this particular evening. But so I started asking myself how I would use that instrument, first as a musician and not as a designer. And I got to talk a little bit with the team. I got to talk a little bit with like fellow musicians that were in residency at the same time. I got to read about it in the historical books, you know. And so I approached it, and I think a lot of people approach it in a way that's very compatible with the mono approach in Eurorack. You know, there is this gigantic avenue of research into 3D sound, ambisonics, all the formats and stuff, and all of these. The primary goal of these technologies that are designed is to immerse the listener, but first negate the room that it's playing in. So from the start, I think kind of implicitly, what is meant by immersion is taking you out of the listening room you are in right now and putting you in another space. And this, so kind of playing an illusion on and kind of trying to cancel as much as possible the real world. And the Acousmonium approach is actually orthogonal, not antagonistic, but orthogonal to this. The Acousmonium approach is we're going to put loudspeakers in a room. It's not very well controlled. There is resonance. It's a concert hall, you know, it's a regular concert hall. We're not trying to deconvolve the room acoustics to impart our own sound. And anyway, our loudspeakers, they're all different, a little bit different. There are very loud ones, there are very small ones, there are full band ones. Every loudspeaker sounds differently. So it really lends into having this approach of conceiving or designing your musical piece as to be played in multi-mono, you know, where you have sources that are meant not to be placed in space, but to be placed in not in space, but in as a sentiment you want to impart. You know, so it's much more efficient to compose and speak of this must feel distant, then this must be this much azimuth elevation and stuff. Okay, this
Right.
must feel distant because the loudspeaker will point not at the public but outwards towards the end, so it will resonate more. So it's actually not very different. So it's actually not very different from working with many mono tracks and organizing them not in space but in the kind of environment you want to put them in.
So you're saying that like composing for the Acousmonium is something to be done specific to the Acousmonium.
That's a long debate
that
because
has its distinct kind of acoustic properties that must be considered. Whereas composing for kind of typical kind of multi-channel environments, it is, like you said, about immersion, taking the listener from the space they are in to a different one.
Yeah, but it's I mean, it's a long debate that we have at the cafeteria with the composers at GRM all the time. Say, what should I prepare in advance? What should I compose in advance? And how can I prepare for the day of the show where I will have 1-2 hours of rehearsal? And I have no idea how these speakers are sound or will resonate, right? So you compose with a vague idea of what you want, and then
Then you see what happens.
And you see what happens, and the composition extends until the moment where you will perform it live on the console, you know.
And it goes back to listening, right? You said that the motto for GRM is to be a good listener, right? So it's just about just kind of showing up in the space and listening to how these sound objects appear and going from there.
Yeah. I strongly think so. Yes. So, and the development, just to finish answering, the development of the multi-channel aspect of Atelier, it really stems from this. You know, we make no preconception on where the speakers will be placed or whatever. We have no notion of like format or whatever. It's the simplest way you can conceive multi-channel. You know. Is
take a signal, spread it around, see what happens.
Yeah, or like, okay, you want to apply a comb filter? Do you want it in mono, stereo, or 64 channel? I don't care. You give me something, I give you the same thing processed back, and that's it. And then it's the musician's responsibility to then afterwards pan it into space or encode it in their favorite ambisonics encoder or whatever. But this is one way to say it is very often in the design of Atelier, I kind of stopped and say, hey, this is not my job anymore. This is your job, guys. This is not my job. So placing things into space, this is not my job anymore. I'm just giving you channels and you deal with them.
Atelier is, of course, a commercial product. It's designed to be sold and it's designed to be ostensibly profitable in the traditional capitalist sense. Yet I think when many people think about GRM, they think of it as a kind of, research institute that's able to be uncompromising in its pursuit of ideas, and that it can exist in this purely artistic realm without much concern for having to create a profitable or without much concern for the traditional profit motive. I guess, yeah. How do you think about that when it comes to Atelier? Maybe it's a bit of a loaded question, but yeah, how do you sort of juggle those seemingly competing forces?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. So you have to. I won't answer in any ways, but I'm just giving you some context. Okay, GRM started in the 50s, grew into this big group of almost 50 people in the 70s. I think it was the peak, or the 80s maybe was the peak. there was a lot of resource back then because also like technology innovation was like there was so much more resource state-wise put into it. But in 75, so GRM from its inception was part of what was called ORTF, which was basically the French public radio, TV, antennas everywhere in France, etc. A big conglomerate of everything related to audiovisuals in France. And so ORTF was split in 75, 76 into different parts. Radio France, the radio station, the 5-6 radio stations we still have today. France TV, France TV, the TV stations, 4 TV stations, a couple of others, and INA, the Institut National de l'Audiovisuel, which is the institution we're part of. Okay, INA was kind of co-designed by Pierre Schaeffer. So Pierre Schaeffer was a political figure at that time in the 70s, and he was he had the opinion that France needed some institution to take care of archival and like exploitation of the archive of everything that's produced audiovisual in France, kind of like the British Library or the Smithsonian, you know, in the US.
Right.
For France and for audiovisuals, only for sound and video. And in his plan, there was a part of INA was about research into audiovisual. And naturally, GRM, his offspring, kind of took its place inside of INA. Today, INA is 1,000 people, 1,000 employees across France. GRM is 12, 13 people. So it's much smaller than what usually people imagine. We're compared to IRCAM and even confused with IRCAM most of the time, just because, you know, it's kind of improbable, especially for Americans, for example, to have two different institutions of this caliber in the same city, in the same country, you know. But we're extremely small, and we're financed by our mother institution, INA. We're part of it. We take part into the activities of INA. But yeah, it was the commercialization of GRM tools. From what I could gather from the history of it, which is not very well documented, it happened almost by mistake. So GRM had a research and development department since its inception, but it was making hardware. You know, it was making machines because that was what's available at the time, and so it was not It was not meant to be industrially produced or whatever. But when GRM tools emerged in the 90s, at the beginning of the 90s, suddenly it was software, it was distributable, and it happened naturally that it became a commercial product.
So I guess we're coming close to time. So there's one question I think we can wrap on, which is a question we like to pose to really all of our guests, and this leads naturally from the last question. How do you, as an artist yourself, kind of navigate living under capitalism? Basically, how do you reconcile these contradictions?
Yeah. It's not easy. I feel blessed to be in a position where I was not exposed to that a lot. You know, I know the music world. Even our little world of experimental music, it's very much political in the way you describe. But even in that world, I mean, it's an economy, not especially an economy of money, but an economy of attention and recognition and stuff. And this is Obviously, we see it daily with composers coming to us. It's a very hard world to navigate, and then even for this particular kind of economy, and then you have to like eat and have a roof under over your head. So that's even more complicated. I I was lucky enough that I didn't have to, that I spent basically all my working years in public institutions and not being exposed to that too much. But I I can see that. So one way I'm exposed to it, for example, is through social media and the economy of attention that we're all subject to, and this is alienating. It's sometimes the world of experimental music feels like everybody is trying to grab attention by doing some. You remember that sketch from the Monty Python, the Ministry of Silly Walks? So everybody is kind of doing its own silly walks and kind of imposing it as something valuable, something that has value. It feels a bit ridiculous at times, I'm sure you feel the same in some way. Everybody's trying to find their little niche, ecological niche, and it's hard. Yeah.
Building up that question, like you've released Atelier. Lots of people have been using it to make music and also asking you to do things with it online, asking you to make updates to it, asking you to change Atelier to suit their needs. And I guess as a designer, as a custodian of GRM's sort of software presence, how do you kind of navigate that? How do you kind of navigate the fact that you, of course, want lots of people to be able to use your software and engage with it and to make music. But there will always be points at which things don't quite click with your conception of GRM. The one thing that comes to mind is just like clock syncing, something like that.
Oh, yet another request, huh, Chris? I'm kidding.
As you saw with our attempt to do a kind of a clap in to this episode, we have no regard for any
what we call an analog clock.
Yes, exactly. We have no regard for any kind of clocks. But this is like a kind of thing where the GRM kind of as Sean and I are and I'm sure you are huge fans of the work of the great composers like Bernard Parmigiani and Beatriz Ferreira and all the people who came through GRM, Luc Ferrari, which is very off the grid music, and then you have lots of musicians who rightly want to be able to make music that's a bit more on the grid. I guess how do you reconcile this tension between wanting to make something for people to use on their terms and also keeping it
pure?
For lack of a better word. There's a better word, but I don't know what it is.
Okay, maybe this will resonate with the question before. What I feel like we are building is, and it's maybe the Ina's board of director wouldn't agree, but what I feel like I'm building is a public service plugin. A public service, something that we're extremely lucky at GRM to be in a position where indeed we can build something, we can take time to build something that's out of the norm, that will not be the first thing, the easy cash you can grab, something that takes more time to build, something right in between a commercial product that you want to sell to the maximum of people and a research project from the university. It's exactly in the middle of that, and it's a rare opportunity to be able to make such a product, And the second factor is we're part of public service. We have extremely limited means. A project of the size of Atelier in the private sector, not doing the same thing, it would be a team of six developers, and marketing and etc. We don't have any of this. I'm the lead developer. Lucian, my colleague, is developer too, and that's basically it. And all the decisions are taken in our office face to face. It's extremely demanding, and it's very taxing because it's a gigantic amount of work. But at the same time, we have complete full liberty on what we do. And if we want to be extremely opinionated and not provide clock syncing for version 1, we can. And it happens to click. It happens to match with GRM's ethics or philosophy in the first place. So all the better. Now that it's out, it's been out for 4 or 5 months. Now that the software is out, there's a kind of new era that begins and new questions that emerge. Yes, people want things, and yes, we have to give them to people. Even I want clock syncing into the tool. It's sometimes you really need it, and you're somehow by giving complete clock freedom, you're also restricting the possibilities that you can do.
Sure, yeah.
Freedom is not freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want as a clock.
Right.
So now we have to navigate this, as you said. We have to navigate I could show you the pages and pages and pages of requests, feature requests from people, feature requests from ourselves. Sometimes they align, sometimes they don't. And it's kind of, now we're in a new era where we're kind of triaging, we're kind of a war hospital and trying to say, okay, this is going to take too much time. We need to abandon it for now. This will go in because it's easy to do. This will go in because it's a huge amount of work, but we really want it personally, and people too, etc. So I have cooking recipes for how to solve this, how to navigate this. I don't have a theory, to go back to the beginning of the DSP conversation. I don't have a theory of here's a clear cut on whether you should do this or not, or attack something. So right now we're working on parallel processing, so being able to have not only just one serial set of tools, but several parallel lanes, like in a DAW. Yeah. And in all of that, we're kind of constantly late, we're constantly late to what we expect from the tool and what people expect from the tool. And now we're running against each other. And we have to not forget too that it needs to be something exciting, Since we have so limited means, we don't want to get burnt out by just answering every possible request, or we have to tackle things that excite us, not only the feature that will emerge from it, but also the work, because...
So is it version 1.2 that just launched? Is that right?
Yeah, version 1.2 has a couple of new stuff, but most important one is the Windows part, which is exactly the opposite of what I just described. It's a super boring feature that really a lot of people use. I haven't had a PC for 20 years, so I had to learn. We both had to learn everything back from scratch. How you code a plugin on Windows, how do you resolve stuff, where's the power button, stuff like that.
Well, you went back to your youth as a kid with a Microsoft Basic and going to Earcom needing a Mac, right? Yeah.
Exactly. It's just the opposite.
Yeah.
That's an example of a feature that, not necessarily very interesting for you to implement, but something that is essential for so many users.
Yeah, that was a chore. And we have to do more chores like that, but we have to find our little corners of amusement inside of this, and especially stay creative, because just from the feedback we got here, we have like maybe 3, 4, 5 years of work ahead. and just menial work, just boring stuff
Right.
like clock syncing and porting to Windows and porting to Linux then and porting to iOS after that,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And we can't, as much as I would like all of this to happen, I have to choose.
Yeah, of course.